Matthew, you're always good for logic. We heard John Thune. Matt Gaetz deserves a transparent process. Great. Then why the hell aren't we seeing this ethics report?
Well, that's an obvious question with no real answer other than it's total hypocrisy one more time. I mean, what I'm struck by, and as I listened to you the first few minutes of this report, is this is somebody that in any other administration wouldn't have cleared the first hurdle to even get to the nominee's desk to even be suggested as the nominee first. He would never even get that far. And then he would not even, if he did get that far, he wouldn't last a New York minute on the Hill. Then they basically send it back and say, it's not going to work, try again in the course of this. But we're in an entirely different world now with the GOP because we have a president in the first time of our history who got elected as a convicted felon. So it's a totally different world there. But my guess is still, and I've said this from the beginning, is there's going to be enough Republican senators, mainly because they don't like the guy, not because of his integrity or any kind of sexual abuse, mainly because they dislike the guy, that his nomination will go down, but he'll get the hearing that he seems to want.
Melanie, what is the reasoning that the Ethics Committee has not decided on releasing this thing? Like, it seems completely obvious to anybody else out there.
Well, first I'm going to give you what their stated reason is from Republicans. They said the report is not complete yet. They did take a vote to actually finish that draft report. They'll meet again in December.
They have an I to dot, a T to cross.
Right. Technical changes. The real reason, Stephanie, is because Speaker Mike Johnson has come out and said, I strongly suggest that the committee does not release it. Donald Trump would be furious. The right would be furious if they were to release this report. So I think a lot of Republicans are really wrestling with that because privately, of course, I think a lot of Republicans, if not all House Republicans, would want to see this report released. There may be a House floor vote forced by Democrats to compel its release. But privately, you know, it's a very different story than what they will say publicly because they are so worried about the MAGA backlash. I mean, you've seen what happens. For example, Jim Jordan, the speakership vote, if you remember that, there was members getting death threats when they were not voting for Jim Jordan or even with the recent GOP leadership race in the Senate. So there's a lot of concern about safety, about getting on Trump's bad side. But this saga, I will just say, is not over yet. They will meet in December, and there will be potentially a floor vote next week from Democrats to force the release of this report.
Well, let's talk about this. Democrats also want to get FBI evidence, but there was no file. There were no charges ever filed. So I get that they want to do this, like, you know, in theory, but practically speaking, is there any evidence to be gotten from the FBI, and will this turn into anything?
I mean, the FBI doesn't traditionally turn over investigatory material that doesn't lead to charges, and there are good reasons for that, right? You don't want, the federal government to be gathering material on private citizens that do not have, criminal activity and then spreading it out there for Congress. Having said that, what has happened here, of course, is that Donald Trump hasn't vetted his appointees through the FBI, which is traditionally what presidents do. Traditionally, presidents make sure that the people they nominate don't have allegations of sexual trafficking on their record.
Okay, we don't need the FBI. We know these allegations are out there. And Matthew, to your original point, right? It's not just Matt Gaetz. 3 of Trump's selections have allegations of sexual misconduct. You brought it up before. Past cabinet nominations, okay, were wiped out because people weren't paying their nanny proper taxes. They smoked weed in college and they wrote mean tweets. Okay, those were disqualifiers in the past. And today, John Cornyn told the New York Times, quote, that standards are apparently evolving. Isn't that the opposite of what a standard is?
I wouldn't use the word evolving. I would use devolving. I mean, it's basically there is no standard. And I think I go back to what I said is I don't think sexual abuse, sexual assault is a disqualifier in this because we have a president who has been convicted of sexual assault and lying about the woman who did it. And so and he's got a number of other convictions that we don't know where they are pending now that he's president-elect in the course of this. I think that the Republicans have chosen this sandbox they're in without any. They know this is a sandbox where Donald Trump is the leader of it, and it has no standards. When you have a president with Donald Trump's background, I don't see how you can demand standards of his cabinet.
Let's talk about J.D. Vance, because J.D. Vance has sort of assumed the role of shepherding these nominees through Congress and trying to, convince his colleagues to, approve of these people.
Yeah.
J.D. Vance was only in Congress for 2 years. Does he really have any sway, or is this they're either going to side with Trump or not?
Well, look, having Vance do it suggests how much is important to Trump, right? You're sending your number 2 person. That's a higher level of Sherpa than you normally have. In that sense, it's a priority setting
Like who would normally do it?
Normally you'd have a former senator, somebody who had been, among the senators in the past, but not a vice president.
Yeah, but in Trump world, that could just be, I don't feel like looking you at Mar-a-Lago,
It's possible,
head on to
right.
D.C.
But I think you're right, though. He's only been there 2 years. He doesn't have those kind of relationships. It's, in the Senate, if you've been there less than 20, 30 years, you're still a newcomer. And he hasn't built those kind of networks that a more experienced senator would have. So I don't think it's going to make that big a difference, the fact that he's been a senator. What makes a difference is that he's speaking for Donald Trump, and the question is whether they're willing to defer to Donald Trump.
All right, Matt Gaetz is not the only controversial choice. Let's talk about RFK Jr. And I just want to remind our audience, RFK Jr. is up for Health and Human Services. That includes agencies like the CDC, the FDA, the National Institutes of Health. This man repeatedly linked vaccines to autism, despite many, many studies that have debunked it. Even GOP senators want answers from him about his vaccine skepticism. Melanie, from senators that you're speaking to, how are they feeling about RFK?
Here's the conundrum right now. They have a lot of concerns about RFK. They have a lot of concerns about Hegseth. They have a lot of concerns about Tulsi Gabbard. The problem is there's so many controversial nominees that they are weighing right now how to use their political capital. Because if they are going to stand up against Donald Trump to oppose Matt Gaetz, they probably can't do that to a couple nominees. So right now you talk to senators behind the scenes and they are weighing, who do I hate the least? Who do I hate the most? Who am I actually willing to stand up against? And so RFK is kind of falling by the wayside. You're not hearing a lot of talk about him. I'm so glad you are bringing him up, though, because it is such a controversial nominee that in any other administration, in any other universe, that would be all we were talking about. But I don't think this is, to be clear, I don't think this is some brilliant strategy by Trump. I don't think it's 3D chess. I think he just wants these people. These are the people he campaigned with. It's not surprising, even if it is shocking to see these members nominated.
But Matt Dowd, my question is why? Because a bunch of these jobs don't even matter to Trump, right? They're not even focuses for him in terms of policy. And then you look at something like the Treasury Secretary, which is a hugely important job. And Donald Trump has serious candidates for it, right? Whether it's going to be Kevin Warsh or Mark Rowan or Scott Bessent, all 3 of these guys are highly qualified. So how is it that he sees it in that regard, right? And sees like he's getting phone calls day in and day out from people campaigning for these 3 candidates and getting phone calls from really important, influential people. And then you turn to the right and the rest of his picks, and it's a clown show.
Well, I think it's hard to apply logic to Donald Trump, and I agree with what was just said, that this is not 3D chess. It's just Donald Trump saying, I'm going to have whatever sycophant I can put in there, I'm going to put in there. I do think Donald Trump understands intuitively that the economy is basically what is running his show in the support that he got that made him president of the United States. It was the economy in the end that turned the voters that didn't like him to him. And I think the Secretary of the Treasury, different than HHS, and probably different than something that like Tulsi Gabbard, is viewed as something that could have a serious impact on the economy if he doesn't get it right. I think to answer the question is I think that what's going to happen is the senators are going to have to pick. They're not going to be able to reject every single one of them. And I think they're going to use a twofer strategy. And the twofer strategy is how important is this position? And how much do I dislike this person? And I think the problem with Matt Gaetz is it's an extremely important position, the Justice Department, and they dislike him. But something like HHS or even the Treasury, it's an extremely important position. And Donald Trump knows that it's tied to the economy and it's tied to the stock market. And he doesn't want to make a pick that could send the wrong signal for the economy. So I don't think he's thought it all through, though I do think he knows the economy is basically what lifted him up.
So if he's willing to choose a serious, capable person for Treasury, but he's happy to choose highly unqualified people for the other roles, What does that tell you about Donald Trump's priorities?
Well, look, this is not Trump 1.0. This is Trump 2.0, right?
How different is that from 1.0?
Radically different. And Trump 1.0 was he picked a lot of people he didn't know, but were people of gravitas and seriousness. Rex Tillerson, right? Head of ExxonMobil. He loved that. Jim Mattis, four-star Marine
He loved it until he
general.
met him.
He loved it until he met him. Exactly. He didn't know these people. And these people looked at him and said, whoa, wait a second. The things you're proposing are unwise, dangerous, maybe illegal, and
You're not following the chain of command.
Exactly, and they stood against him. That's not going to happen in a second term. He's determined to have people who are going to be only loyal to him and not have people who might resist the kind of more extreme versions of things he wants to do.